What if the reason no one has ever answered us is that someone has been listening the whole time and stopped believing it was safe to speak? This is the story of a signal that was never sent, and the people who found it anyway. Dr. Mara Voss had spent 6 years staring at a star she would never visit. It was called HD 40307, 42 light-years from Earth, a calm orange dwarf wrapped in a wide, faint ring of dust. Astronomers had been photographing that dust for over a decade. It was, by every measure, boring. Beautiful, but boring. The kind of object you study once, publish a paper on, and move past. Mara hadn't moved past it. She worked nights at a university observatory outside Flagstaff, cataloging archive survey data that nobody else wanted to touch. It was not glamorous work. It was the kind of work that built careers slowly, if it built them at all. But 3 weeks earlier, she had noticed something in the old images that shouldn't have been there. The dust ring around HD 40307 was not behaving like dust. Dust rings are shaped by gravity, by starlight, by the slow chaos of physics. Over 10 years, a ring like that should drift thin and spread, the way smoke spreads in still air. This one hadn't drifted randomly. It had thickened in the same places, at the same times, in a rhythm that repeated every 341 days. Mara ran the numbers 4 times before she let herself believe them. Rings don't remember, she said quietly to her monitor, the way people talk to computers at 2 in the morning when no one else is around to hear how strange they sound. Rings don't have a memory. She brought it to her old advisor, Dr. Elias Okafor, a radio astronomer with 30 years of experience, politely telling young scientists that their exciting discovery was actually a calibration error. He looked at her data for a long time without speaking. "You're saying something is maintaining this," he said finally. "I'm saying it doesn't look natural." Every astronomer who's ever said that sentence turned out to be wrong. "I know," Mara said, "but has anyone actually checked?" He hadn't. No one had. The dust ring had been observed, measured, filed away, and forgotten, because everyone assumed someone else had already ruled out the strange explanation. That is how the biggest discovery in human history almost stayed buried in a spreadsheet. Elias agreed to book 3 nights on a radio array in New Mexico. Not because he believed her, because he couldn't prove she was wrong, and that bothered him more than being wrong himself ever had. The first 2 nights gave them nothing. Noise, static, the ordinary hiss of the universe. On the 3rd night at 2:47 a.m., the receivers caught something structured. It wasn't a message. Not words, not math, not the clean prime number pulse every science fiction movie had trained the public to expect. It was a pattern of silence. Specific frequencies, dampened at specific moments, in a sequence too precise to be coincidence and too irregular to be a machine repeating itself. It was less like a broadcast and more like something breathing carefully, trying not to be heard. "It's not sending a signal," Mara whispered. "It's hiding one." Elias didn't answer. He was staring at the screen. The way a person stares at a door they suddenly aren't sure they want to open. "If something built that ring to cover a signal," he finally said, "then it didn't want to be found." "Then why?" Mara asked. "Is it still broadcasting anything at all?" Neither of them had an answer, but both of them understood in that moment that they had just become the first 2 human beings to ask the right question. It took 4 more months, a small team sworn to confidentiality, and help from a signals processing specialist named Priya Raman to translate what they'd found. Not translate like language. Translate like a memory forced into shape. What emerged wasn't a greeting. It was closer to a record, a pattern that, when properly aligned, produced something like an image. Less a photograph than an impression, the way a memory feels more than it shows. It showed ruins. Not one civilization's ruins. Many, layered over one another, faint outlines repeating across the same signal, as if whoever built this had shown the same warning again and again to whoever might one day be listening closely enough to receive it. Priya was the one who said it out loud. "This isn't a message to us specifically," she said. "This is something they show everyone who gets close enough to see it." "Everyone who gets close enough," Mara repeated slowly. "You mean we're not the first?" "I mean, we might be the first in a very long time who notice." The team spent the next 2 months doing the hardest kind of science, The kind where you're afraid of your own conclusion. Piece by piece, the picture became clear. HD 40307's dust ring wasn't a natural formation. It was a shell, engineered over thousands of years by a civilization old enough that their earliest structures had crumbled back into the very dust that now hid them. They called themselves, in the closest approximation the signal allowed, something that translated roughly to the Quiet Ones. The record showed why they'd gone silent. Long ago, the Quiet Ones had done what every curious civilization eventually does. They reached out. They made contact with younger species, eager to help, eager to share knowledge that had taken them 100,000 years to earn. It went wrong. Not through malice, through mismatch. A civilization handed tools. It wasn't ready for collapses the same way a plant drowns from too much water. The younger species didn't survive contact, not because the Quiet Ones attacked them, because knowing too much, too fast, broke something the Quiet Ones hadn't known could break. It happened again, and again with other species, across tens of thousands of years, no matter how careful they tried to be. Eventually, the Quiet Ones concluded the only responsible choice left to them was silence. They didn't stop watching. They stopped speaking. They built their concealment, not to protect themselves from danger, but to protect the species they study from the danger of being noticed too soon by something so much older. They had been doing this, the record suggested, for over 4,000 years. They had watched countless civilizations rise. They had watched most of them fail, some to war, some to their own success, some to simple, quiet extinction that no one outside ever saw. Every single time, the Quiet Ones stayed hidden. They believed by now that contact itself was a danger, not weapons, not distance, just the wrong species meeting the wrong species at the wrong moment in its own growth. They've been protecting everyone they've ever found, Elias said, by refusing to ever be found, which left Mara facing the only question that mattered. The concealment wasn't perfect. It had been built to hide from civilizations at humanity's technological level, and for 10 years, it had worked exactly as intended. No one at Mara's observatory, no government, no other team on Earth, had noticed, except she had, that the record made clear in its final layer was not supposed to be possible yet, and it changed something. Buried within the signal was a final structure, one that hadn't triggered for any previous discovery in the archive, a kind of message reserved only for a species that found on her own, without being told, without being shown, through nothing but attention and refusal to look away. It was an offer, not of technology, not of rescue, of contact, on human terms, whenever humanity was ready to answer, and not one moment before. Mara sat with that for a long time before she brought it to anyone above her. She thought about every version of first contact humanity had imagined. The terror, the wonder, the speeches, the panic. None of it looked like this. This was quiet, patient, almost gentle in a way that felt somehow more frightening than an invasion would have. If we answer, Priya asked her, and we're not ready, what happens to us? I don't know, Mara said, but I know what happens if we're capable of finding this, and too afraid to say anything back. We'd be exactly what they were afraid we'd become. They didn't send technology. They didn't send coordinates or warnings or grand declarations written for history books. Mara's team, working quietly with a small international group of scientists sworn to careful disclosure, sent something simpler. They sent proof that a species could notice a message meant only for the patient and choose curiosity over fear. They sent silence back, shaped the same careful way the Quiet Ones had shaped theirs. Not empty, but full of restraint. A signal that said, without a single word, we see you, and we are not afraid of what that means. No response came that week, or that month, but 3 months later, in the same dust ring, at the same coordinates, a new pattern appeared. One no telescope had ever recorded before. It wasn't a warning. It wasn't a ruin. It was as close as a translation could manage. Something closer to welcome. The story could have ended there. In most ways, it did. Humanity had found something ancient, listened carefully, and answered wisely instead of rushing toward either fear or greed. That, on its own, was the achievement. But buried in the very last layer of the signal one detail remained unexplained. The record referenced other concealments, other rings around other stars, built by the same hands, watching other worlds the way HD 40307 had watched Earth. One of them, according to the data, was closer to our own sun than any star system humanity had ever mapped in detail. Marat never got a clear answer to what it meant. Neither did anyone else. Somewhere, much nearer than 42 light years, something may have been quietly watching humanity long before HD 40307 ever noticed we were looking. No one has found it yet. Could this actually happen? What is real? Dust rings around nearby stars are real and heavily studied. Astronomers have genuinely discovered giant planets and other massive objects hidden inside these dust disks for years, only detected after very close analysis of old survey data, similar to real 2026 discoveries around other stars. Radio surveys searching for artificial techno-signatures from other civilizations are an active, serious area of modern astronomy. What is scientifically possible? The idea that an advanced civilization could engineer a large-scale structure to conceal or camouflage evidence of its presence is speculative, but not physically impossible. Scientists have seriously discussed related concepts, including partial Dyson structures and deliberate non-contact strategies, sometimes called the zoo hypothesis, as a possible explanation for why we haven't detected other civilizations yet. What is speculative? Whether such concealment could hide a signal specifically shaped like pattern silence, and whether that signal could be reliably decoded the way it is in this story, is entirely speculative. There is no confirmed techno-signature of this kind in real astronomical data. What is fiction? The quiet ones, their history, their 4,000-year silence, and their final message are entirely fictional, created for this story. Final verdict. The science behind the mystery is real. The dust, the hidden discoveries, the search for signals in old data, all of that reflects genuine, ongoing astronomy. The civilization behind the signal is fiction, but the question underneath it is not, if someone has been watching and staying silent to protect us, would we even know how to notice? And if we noticed, would we know what to say back?